How's it going, you guys? And welcome back to the channel. You know, when I woke up this morning, I was doing my hair and it ended up becoming a little bit messy. And then after my morning workout, I got very sweaty, and then it got a lot more messy. So I'm pretty sure if people saw me on the street, they would say, "Look at his hair, it's so messy. He was so lazy with it." Where am I going with this? All the traits that describe my hair basically describe Fantasy Island. Fantasy Island stars Lucy Hale, Maggie Q, Michael Pena, and more, and is directed by Jeff Wadlow, and is a movie reboot of the old Fantasy Island TV show. The story follows a group of people that travel to a remote island to live out their innermost fantasies, but when those fantasies begin to turn into nightmares, the group must work to solve the mystery of the island in order to escape. So I should probably preface this review by saying that I have absolutely no knowledge on the TV show. And considering that we're reaching the end of October, I figured that I'd talk about Fantasy Island because, well, it is labeled as a horror thriller. Well, maybe I should have saved this review for another time in the year because Fantasy Island is anything but horror or thriller. Fantasy Island is one of those films where it gets absolutely lost in what kind of film it's trying to be, and it ends up becoming just a big convoluted mess. The whole idea of going to a place that will allow you to live out your innermost fantasies is a pretty interesting concept for a film, and the idea that a fantasy won't always live up to your expectations is also a great thing to remember. The fantasies in this film consist of people living out fantasies which you've probably thought of yourself or have seen on film before, whether that be living the wealthy life, erasing regret because of past decisions, taking out revenge on others that did you wrong, or simply seeing a loved one again. And seeing the consequences play out on screen was pretty cool to see, I guess. But the ending result is still a big mess, despite how cool all of that sounds on paper. But one of the biggest problems with this is when you watch the fantasies play out on screen and seeing how different they all are from each other, it feels a little bizarre. And I know I said I haven't watched any of the TV show before, but when watching this movie, it feels like they were making episodes based on all these characters' fantasies and mashing it all together to create a feature film. At one point, you get to see Lucy Hale's character getting the revenge she wanted by torturing one of the other characters on the island. And then all of a sudden, you'll switch to Maggie Q's character where she's living out the happy, wonderful life of rainbows and sunshine in the very next scene. And it ends up completely messing with the film's tone that this movie is struggling to find. And it feels like you're just watching a slasher cliche film, and then all of a sudden you switch to a cheesy Hallmark movie. But being made by Blumhouse, you can pretty much expect both of those in this movie, more cheesy than anything. The movie also introduced these two characters that are like Bill and Ted, who are living out the wealthy life and hooking up. And they can get very irritating, by the way. And then there's this other character who's fantasizing of living his life out as a soldier in the army. But the two tones just don't mix together at all. Just imagine if you were watching this film for yourself and it switched from a party film to a war film in just a few seconds.
You guys look good. Really great.
And speaking of which, this movie is labeled as a horror thriller, but it just fails on every level. Most of the time when I was watching this, I never had a moment where I found myself tensing up in the slightest, and all of the setups for those moments were so obvious and cliche with jump scares and stuff. They honestly should have labeled this movie as comedy/fantasy instead, even though it only succeeds in the fantasy part. Yeah, the humor in this movie really isn't anything special either, and to be honest, I think I found myself laughing at the non-comedic moments a lot more than the comedic moments. This is a spoiler alert here, but honestly, I don't think you should really care because this movie is shit. But one of the moments where I found myself laughing the most is when Michael Rooker's character dies. He ends up saying that he's gonna help the characters get off the island, but literally a minute later, he ends up falling off of a cliff while fighting this dude, and he ends up dying.
Never did right by her. I'm gonna get you both off this island, one way or the other.
You know, he could have just, like shoved him off of that cliff and he would have been completely fine. But movie has to happen somehow. Also, no joke here, but as soon as I saw that Michael Rooker was in this movie, I had a very strong feeling that he wasn't going to last long, and I hadn't even seen his character yet. And to be honest with you, he doesn't really serve a big purpose in this movie, which kind of sucks, to be honest. Maybe I was just thinking about him in The Walking Dead, and that's why he died off so quick. Maybe that's why I had that strong feeling, but I don't know. And while I'm on the topic of odd casting choices in Fantasy Island, without a doubt, I can't understand why Michael Pena is even in this movie as Mr. Rourke. I like to think of his role as the guy who would have the chilling personality, who's full of mystery, who gives off the nice vibe at first, but you know something is going down behind the scenes. Casting Pena in this movie almost gives you the same feeling as when you saw that Heath Ledger was going to be playing as the Joker, but at least he actually made that role work. I also find it funny how this movie decided to bring in an actor that's actually really funny and put him in the villain role and give all the attempted comedy scenes to all these other actors. And the more I thought about this one thing, the more annoying it got. Throughout the entire movie, the dialogue is so bad due to the fact that all the characters only give exposition about themselves for almost the entirety of this runtime. The majority of the runtime is just filled with the characters living out their fantasies, running into other ones, and explaining why their fantasies are, why that is, and it just repeats itself over and over and over, and it got stuck in my head for this whole movie. Then you also have them asking Pena how these fantasies are even possible, and I kept on asking myself that question too. And what's his explanation?
It's the island. The island has great powers.
What does that mean?
It's the island.
The only info you have about these characters is what kind of fantasies they want to live out.
It's the island.
Okay, but that doesn't explain how they're seeing perfect visions of characters they know.
It's the island.
If you don't give me an explanation right now, I'm gonna go insane.
It's the island.
Yeah, I don't care if it's fantasy. If something like Yelp can exist in this world, I would really love a logical explanation on how all of this stuff is working out.
It's the island.
God. And the whole explanation in this movie is just stupid. Oh my god. On top of all that, the entire plot becomes so convoluted near the end of this movie that everything gets more and more confusing that I really couldn't care less anymore. During the last 45 minutes or so, the movie ends up introducing so many random, pointless plot twists for these characters that it feels like they're just force-feeding them. And it's almost like they're trying to say, hey look, we know what we're doing, plot twist, that makes the movie good, right? But because of all the repeated explanation this movie gives you for each character, the twists don't really feel like much of a twist, and it feels like it's just there to increase the runtime.
It's the island.
Okay, yeah, there's the explanation that we were looking for all these stupid twists. So overall, Blumhouse's Fantasy Island, I wish was just a fantasy. It's another case of one of those films that takes an interesting concept, throws it on paper, and delivers a horrible end result. The whole layout of the story is just lazy, convoluted, and drawn out to the point that it becomes much more boring as it progresses. And Blumhouse, you had one simple job: make a horror movie, and you blew it. This movie fails on so many levels to bring any kind of suspense or scare that actually works, and it tries so hard to be funny that I don't understand why they didn't just label the movie as a comedy and actually try to make it work. This movie is only a little bit over an hour and a half long, but when you watch it for yourself, it feels more like 2.5 hours, considering how drawn out all these scenes go, and how often they explain the exact same shit to you. And surprisingly enough, there's even an unrated version of this movie, and the only things that make it different are a little bit more violence and gore in certain scenes, a few seconds of nudity, which isn't even emphasized in the scene. You'd have to have a little bit of an eagle eye to spot it, and 1 second of profanity, which they use the F-bomb in. They probably could have put that version in theaters and made it rated R, because that's basically what it is. I've seen so many R-rated films that have much more graphic content than this. If you want to check out the changes for yourself, I'll leave a link in the description, because they're honestly ridiculous, but maybe it could have made the original film much more exciting to watch. All I can say left is I'm buying myself a one-way ticket to Fantasy Island to live out my fantasy of never having watched this film at all. And a few others. In other words, this movie's getting 1 out of 10 islands.
It's the island. The island has great powers.
Oh my god, all of that bullshit. Blumhouse, come on. You have no idea what you're doing. But anyways, I'd like to know, what do you guys think of Fantasy Island? Love it? Hate it? Not care to watch it? Let me know in the comments below. And I'd also like to know what your fantasy would be. If you made it this far in the video, I'd appreciate it if you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. Thank you guys for joining me in this not spooky review, which should have been. Until the next video, you guys, I'll see you later.